Всем привет, это проект Альфа. Меня зовут.
Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman. You are watching live War Diary with Alexey Arestovich. Alexey is online. Hello. Hello everybody. Hello Nikolai. Hello viewers. Glad to see you all. Love everybody. Okay, let's start with Trump's press conference. Ukraine will not be in NATO. This is clear for everybody, said Donald Trump. And Alexei supported him by writing a pretty big post on social media, asking a question as well, what can be there besides NATO and EU? And that ignited a big conversation underneath it, and a very emotional one. Denis Kazansky wrote a big message about the neutral status as an invitation for the further aggression against Ukraine. I'm glad the dialogue started. But overall, let's comment on this. Perhaps let me ask you, Alexei, to briefly summarize what can be instead of NATO. Nikolai, we'll say what is instead of NATO, but I think, first of all, we need to talk about the models of thinking. The Ukrainian problem is that very few people can understand, can recognize what models they operate in. The main thing is to be able to separate rational from emotional and from desirable. It's only usually the little kids who cannot separate these three categories, but if little kids are 50 or 60 years old, that means they did not stop being little kids. The horror of this situation, though, is that in order for the place where these 50 and 60-year-old kids to survive, they need to start thinking at least like 20-year-olds, because if they continue thinking like 6-year-olds, it'll be a lot of trouble. And, they cannot detach from an idea that, okay, we all want to join NATO and EU. I personally want us to join NATO and EU. But what if they don't accept us? Do we have second options? Do you have plan B? C, D, E, F, G, H. Most people do not answer this question. They usually fall down to hysteria with some irony, sarcasm, but not serious planning of an option B. But you cannot run the state without that. And betting on option A, which is entirely consisted of wants and not can-dos, that creates a lot of issues for the country. Denis Kazansky is a rather smart person. I know him, and we've been in discussion for a while. But when I ask him if we'll not be accepted, he challenges back saying it's only Trump saying that. Well, then I'm answering to him in my post. 4 years we're not taken in because of Trump, then maybe 8 years because of Vance, then maybe Democrats come in power in states and they still do not accept us into NATO, just like the previous ones, because they have other reasons. And then Republicans come over and the cycles change, and then me and Dennis are 80 or even beyond 80, and we can come back 30 or 40 years to this commentary and still rediscuss this situation and to find out that we're still not members of NATO. What do we do then? And he posts a very fantastic thing. I'm thankful to him for posting that. He's saying that it's better to dream about joining NATO, knowing that we will never be accepted, than to sit. How did he write it exactly? Than to dream about bonuses from Putin. That's his exact verbatim. And he's referring here to my post where I mentioned that we can exchange not joining NATO for a serious bonus from Russia, because this is one of their main goals since about 2003, 2004, to not let us join NATO. And that's probably one of the hard goals in their operations against us. And when people asked me what kind of bonuses we're talking about, I said, well, different ones. Depends who's in power in Russia, but we perhaps could trade for free natural gas forever. And then they come attack me, why do we need natural gas free? Just to be on the needle from Russia, be codependent on them, or something else? And I'm answering that no, we need this additional booster to switch Ukraine to a new type of industrialization. But unfortunately, not many of them are listening to these detailed answers. And that's the current state of our discussion about the future of the country. And we would be smart to do something about the models of operation. People very often just post their opinions. But if you remember Plato, knowledge is based opinion. I'm not even going deeper with more scholastic of significant features of knowledge. But in response to that, I get a lot of pushback saying that you're too one-sided, your opinion or nothing else. Why do you not take critique? To which I parry that, please show me critique. I want discussion, because these are all our people and we will have to be building our future with them. But unfortunately, there's seldom ever discussion. Very often it's just an emotional reaction. And something needs to be done about that one. Such people as Denis, who is not just your average citizen, who's actually very smart. I know him from a very good side. But even when he is saying that it's better to dream about unattainable NATO than about Putin's bonuses, I understand that while I'm criticizing the office of the president for being incompetent to solve the tasks posted in front of them by history and life, but is it just the office that needs critique? You start to think that perhaps we do not have too many competent people in the country to rely upon in this society. And it turns out that we do have serious issues. Keep looking for those people with a flashlight during the daytime, right? Okay, a couple more moments before that, Alexey. I wanted to mention here, look, your logic was always different from not only general societal logic, but overall what's discussed in the media. I remember in 2014, when you were commenting on Maidan on Hromadske TV, you were saying that if certain things don't happen, there'll probably be fighting in our cities. And you're answering somebody's question saying that, I've seen what it looks like, what does a city warfare look like. It's very difficult style of fighting the war. And you were referring to that as a military person who knows how these things unfold. Right, Nikolai, besides being military being my main specialty at this time, I already saw what in-city fighting may look like in some other countries. Right, so what you're saying, Alexey, is that the difference between thinking of our general society at large and those of them who actually partook in the fights in the cities, who understand that as a military science. So when you talk about things like bonuses from Putin, in the mass media and mass conscience in Ukraine, Putin is the hellspawn and a horrible monster. Right, I understand you don't like using these descriptors against him. Oh, no, Nikolai, I can call him a hellspawn and a horrible person, but still, as politicians, as the country next to Russia, it would make sense for us to get some bonuses from our relations with them. What was usually considered to be the highest achievement in politics is to turn your enemy into your friend. In Ukraine, we're shaming it as the worst thing that can happen. So I have a question to all of these who shame that. Where have you been for the last 50 centuries of human history? And perhaps it's a result of removing most important science and historic classes from the high school in Ukraine. I'd probably just leave Ukrainian language and some PE to prepare some people who know how to shoot rifles, or maybe go out, shoot the Enlao once, and his life is done. That's the life goal, right? And his mother was raising him for 18 years for that single shot. With such approach, we cannot build politics that will help us build the future country. And we need to understand that regardless of direction of politics that we choose, okay, everybody condemns Arestovych with his realpolitik. We refused, for example, from Trump, somehow magically get this aid from Europe instead of United States when they withdraw. And we continue fighting. But the problem is we'll be continuing to fight with severe issues because our acuity of thinking, our models of life that we live in, will not lead us to the victories that we desire. This is based deeper into the way we see the world, into how we think about events. All right, Alexey, there is one more thesis I want to bring up. I think you mentioned it this week, that no one in human history, no fighting sides strike any agreements because they trust each other. They strike agreements because they do not trust each other, because they were fighting. Right, Nikolai, this is I thought it's a very basic truth. It's only enemies who sign contracts, sign agreements at the end of the war. Friends don't do that. If I'm your friend, we don't really sign agreements. You and I meet together and solve it. Don't remember when I did it last time, but it's those people those nations who have concerns, who want some insurances, those are the ones signing the agreements. So that's to counter that thought that we cannot sign anything with Russia because we don't trust them. Well, friends don't sign anything. Enemies and rivals sign documents between each other. Show me in the history of 20th century one contract signed by best friends and not by rivals or enemies. You see, thinking starts with definitions. We need to understand what is a contract, what is an agreement, when do we need it, so we understand what we're talking about. Otherwise, the emotions run galore and boil off any logical solution for situation, and that's a catastrophic vector for Ukraine. All right, Alexey, on this logic, where we have established that the two sides that trust each other, they don't sign agreements, they don't sign war pacts, or ceasefires. So what do we do with them? Well, it can be very simple, Nikolai. We can talk about, okay, you need neutral status, right? We can agree to a neutral status. And by the way, Russia is not against us joining EU. They know what they're doing. They know that we will never be accepted to EU, but they use it to demonstrate some flexibility from their side. Moreover, they also prognosticate a significant jump of anti-West moods in Ukraine in about 3 to 5 years, and they're planning for that. Because these guys, with all their deficiencies and peculiar ways of thinking, they understand realpolitik, they understand the trends. So what I'm suggesting, we can exchange a lot of bonuses for that neutral status, starting with territories and finishing with very key questions like energy sources, numbers of our army, perhaps some cooperation in some things about external markets or external threats. We can do a lot of things. So you think the numbers of Ukrainian military can be a subject of discussion with Russia? Oh, it was a subject, Nikolai. It was a key element in Istanbul negotiations, and I'm sure it'll bubble up again. You can see now from Russian Telegram channels that they're publishing the conversation between Lavrov and the future security minister under Trump, or security advisor under Trump. And Lavrov did mention the positions of Russia at this point, and they did not talk about the numbers of army in Ukraine, but they talked about demilitarization. Demilitarization is basically reducing the number of military in Ukraine. And we cannot afford that because we're a big country. We are located in a peculiar position between two worlds, and we need to make sure that we have good relations and with whom we can, and look at our relations with Fico and some other countries in our immediate neighborhood. Given the fact that we seem to be going the whole world into the decade of localized military conflicts, when we hear some statements that, we cannot exclude possible use of force in letting Greenland join the United States, right? And people are accusing Trump of changing the world. Well, they don't understand a simple thing. Trump is reacting to the rules that have already shifted in this world, which say that in order for you to preserve something, you need to have military force to hold it. You cannot just rely on law because you're right, because this doesn't work. It hasn't been working for a while. Now you have to be stronger. That's why Ukraine is too tasty and too dumb of a piece geographically to not have questions to us presented by some potential other parties, not only Russia. So we can post a question. You operate in reality when only Russia threatens Ukraine. What if the threat is coming from somebody else, not Russia? Who will be defending you? Us. Russia will be defending us if they want to reduce our military numbers. If they want to sign a treaty with Ukraine that doesn't have an army, well, then it's not about having Ukraine as a neighbor. It's about acquiring Ukraine. Now, ultimately, this is a different conversation. We're not going to do that. We're not going to agree to that. Who will defend us if NATO is not taking us? US and NATO is not defending us. Who will defend Ukraine? And here, 25th article of United Nations, that is saying that, verbatim, that any country needs to have capability to defend itself. This is a self-defense article. And even Russia cannot object to that. They actually had experience with them when in Istanbul group, they were saying you have to diminish the size of your army. I told them, I paired them with the 25th article of United Nations, and they did not know what to answer. They were prepared by lawyers, by very smart people how to negotiate with us, but they cannot denounce the 25th article of United Nations. So we do have a very strong pillar to rely upon, that we need to have a right to defend ourselves. And here it just bubbles up another question: what is enough? What can be Ukrainian armed forces in the future? But in any condition, it should not be less than 250,000 in the future. All their Istanbul dreams about 50,000, 140,000, 180,000, this will remain dreams. They need to understand that 250 is the minimum. Alexey, 250,000, is it the number that can solve problems when we face problems, or could be facing problems from different sides? Nikolai, this is the army of peace times that needs to hold on for the first 3 days while mobilization is unfolding. We're not a rich country. We need to have the army of peace times, the smallest we can, but enough to fulfill the holding barrier, while similar to Switzerland, we can bring a significant number of reservists in 3 days under arms and deploy the army of 800,000 or 1 million if we need to, or even bigger, to fulfill the tasks we need to. That system needs to be implemented, the system of reserve military forces, reservists, and the main peacetimes army has a simple task of just holding for 3 days while we are unfolding the reservists. And it should be enough. 250 for our territory, that's enough. Second aspect of this is we need to create a system of relations where we can guarantee Russia that from the territory of Ukraine, never, verbatim, never, there will be a threat to Russia, military threat to Russia, and a system of arbitrage that allows to solve different questions that arise without use of armed forces. But that system will work the best to as much as armed forces and military-industrial complex and people at large and strong economy will be backing it up, due to which people will try not to run away, run for the hills during the conflict, but to rather go and defend their country. So any solution, any discussion with Russia is a serious matter for internal politics of Ukraine. Because situation when 6 million men do not want to get on the rosters of drafting commissions, and 500,000 are somewhere running away from all that. So regardless of the territory, there's another fallacy happening here in our discussion, that if we had Kherson and Zaporozhye under Ukraine and we could incur in Russian territory deeper into some other parts, anybody conducting negotiations from Russian side would ask you a question: how many deserters you have? 1 out of every 6 drafted? You have 150,000 who are potentially part of the army but are now somewhere AWOL from their units. These are significant numbers. You guys probably all in all have half of your army that are AWOL from their positions, and you were planning for 500,000 reservists or 500,000 people to be brought to the front, but you managed to draft only 250,000. That's not a strong position. While Podolyak and the president are talking about a strong position, you need to reconsider how you acquire this strong position, because when you forcibly put people in buses to join the army, you will never have a strong position, because half of them will refuse to fight. Even if you capture Russia all the way to Vladivostok, your country at its core will be corrupt and will never have a strong position. So we can come to negotiate with Russia only when we have a strong consolidated internal position, when we're strong internally. In order to create such a position, we need to conduct elections. This administration will fail to do that. We can see that day by day they're failing time and time again to address this issue. So it has to be a new administration that will rebuild that contour for agreement inside Ukraine. If we do not achieve agreement, cannot achieve agreement internally, there is nothing we can jointly present to negotiations with Russia. Any article of negotiations with Russia must be a strongly agreed upon element of our inner relations. External politics is always a super factor for internal politics. That's why I'm adamant about us figuring out how we go, how we proceed as a society. And that's why I suggest first neutral status. Second article I suggest is mutually beneficial cooperation with EU and NATO without legally joining them. Because there are good examples. Israel, South Korea, American aviation is fighting for Israel, or in South Korea case, they do warn China or any other aggressor that they're ready to use nuclear arms, defending their ally, by the way, who is not a member of NATO. And while in NATO, there are still discussions whether NATO has to defend the Baltic countries if Russia will attack them. So not everything hinges on being you a member of NATO. It is just a vision that people who suffered from this war, who are sitting under bombs daily, they are grasping at straws and they're hoping that this is one of the ways for us. I understand our compatriots who say only NATO. My task is try to explain what happens if we are not accepted to NATO. What do we cover ourselves in a bed sheet and crawl towards the cemetery? Third point of my program for Ukraine is to enforce and grow our military-industrial complex to a fruitful production system. The next 10 to 20 years, nothing is guaranteed. We may face separatism, we may face terrorists, we may face immediate neighbors, including the NATO countries, by the way. For example, look, United States recently was discussing perhaps acquiring territory from the NATO member, Denmark, right? So countries, even in peace times, need to have strong army for a simple reason. Look at our generals. These are not the best generals that we can have. Do you know why? Because we failed at proper preparation of military cadre. In order to grow a general, he needs to start growing from a lieutenant. And he needs to continue working as a military specialist, continuously improving for a couple decades. For that, he needs to go through military training exercises with a lot of troops, with a lot of equipment, which costs a lot of money. And when the war starts, you cannot go buy general as carrots in the market. And that's why Switzerland, for example, without being involved in any war for 213 years, are not diminishing their military budget and military exercise, because they understand that when perhaps they need their working army, maybe 200 years later, they will not be able to buy him anywhere. They need to grow them for decades. But same thing for us. Do we have 25 years to grow generals? Only if we can acquire this time by our strong position. That's why strong army, strong military-industrial complex, strong special services. Fourth article, close integration with immediate neighbors. Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Romania, Poland. We don't border with Czech Republic, but through Slovakia, they have the same military-industrial complex system. So if we make friends with Fico, that would be good. What did this war reveal? And overall discussion, the whole palette around this war, that your neighbors understand you fine with this war, because your problem is part of their problem. But remote countries, same as, let's say, old Europe or extra-governmental structures, they have issues understanding you. Your neighbors get you well. For hundreds of years, they live in the same world. They also tend to give you the best help and the fastest help, because they understand that if you fail, they're next in line. It is through their territories that Shahed UAVs fly, that missiles fly through sometimes. They already understand that this is a significant threat. Their military is already in a system of highest alert. They resonate with us. Moreover, all aid that we're getting through neighbors and through their territories, either directly from them or through their territories. So having great relations with neighbors is absolutely paramount for Ukraine's survival in the world where everything is crumbling and shaking. The degree of cooperation needs to be measured, as I write, not with just declarations or us joining some groups, but by the number of adequate military projects, defense projects, economic projects. 5 article, close cooperation with the countries of the Global South. India, China, these countries are interested in our infrastructure and our agriculture and our resources. They have significant interest to Ukraine, and we need to appeal to that interest. That's why I was saying it's not so much NATO that is our reliable defender as Chinese and Indian investments in our territory. Because for them to bomb the ports that are rented by Chinese or Indians, that would be a problem. Or bomb a railroad where India is getting some transport cargo through. Or attacking the fields where Arabic countries are growing some bread for themselves. They might fight with NATO, and Russia is eager to conflict with NATO, but they definitely will not go for a conflict with China or India. And that would allow us to stabilize this part of relations, plus it adds a significant degree of investments to our economy. So, Alexey, in your view, should China be removed from this equation, given how Trump is talking about Panama, that is being controlled by China, that Panama Canal is controlled by China, and there may be a solution that needs to happen there, and renegotiation or something else? Well, look, I understand that Chinese may have been expanding their influence in different parts of the world, but we are an independent country, and I think it's always better to apologize than to ask for permission. Because without China and their significant participation in our economy, without them clashing their interests with Indian and American interests and creating a system of arbitrage, how to solve the conflicts, we will not get significant safety net. If all our safety eggs will be only in the Western basket, we've seen how the West helps. They help a lot, but not enough to solve the core of the problems. Here's another example for you, Kazakhstan, in regards of which Russian propagandists keep saying that we will take your north away from you, but they continue to not do that. Why? Because Kazakhstan is actually smart in creating multi-vector security system around itself, because it does have interests of China in its territory, it does have some Western cooperation, and that's important. That's the recipe for an actually strong position in this tumultuous times that we're going through. So globally, we need to reach out to everybody, to Global South, including not only one Western basket. We need to include the king's dynasties of the Persian Gulf, Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, India, China, further to the east. India is in a Global South, but they're the closest ally of the West there. And of course, Pakistan and the other countries. Ukraine needs to play wide. The part of the wide project that I'm a proponent of is to include other vectors. Turkey, Bulgaria, all our neighbors, close and far. You did talk about arbitrage in relations with Russia, in relations with negotiations process, and you're also talking about arbitrage in regards to the other countries, such as China. What, in your view, this arbitrage could consist of? What would be the body? It could be, Nikolai, some joint commission that draws the system of red lines, approaching which or crossing which is an immediate topic for open dialogue and significant consultations. But the core of this commission needs to operate in details. They need to go into the actual imbalances that exist between Russia and Ukraine, like what caused this war, and include if there is some tension lines going through Belarus as well, and create such a system of security that liquidates or blocks the further development of these reasons. And this has not happened since 1991. We've been dividing it by force and some other ways. So who needs to be part of that arbitrage? Joint Russian-Belarus-Ukraine Commission. For example, Nikolai, you can invite other neighbors, Poland, Kazakhstan, the countries of Southern Caucasus, all our neighbors, Turkey, etc. Some council, some security council of Eastern Europe, or Eastern Black Sea and Baltic and Black Sea regions. There could be different formats of that. It depends upon the readiness of the partners to listen to each other. And if we will not be suggesting these initiatives, we will have a peace agreement imposed upon us forcibly by the West and Russia. They can always freeze the conflict, but the West never really dug deep into the reasons for our conflicts, and it's not a way to solve them. And in Ukraine, we apparently have a mental dilemma, whether a weak peace enforced by the West or your own peace created by your own means with the help of the West and the East and the South. So why do you want a weak peace that will eventually break into another war? Did you not fight enough? Alexey, why people are not looking at it this way? Well, first of all, Nikolai, nobody is posting this question in this matter. Second, very few people can, and Russian side also makes statements that they don't want to negotiate with Zelensky, so it's not in favor of Zelensky administration to post these questions. And they may not be willing to negotiate with anybody who represented Zelensky administration in this war. Because simple reason, what will they present as denazification for their own people? Because they will have to explain it to their own populace in Russia. What for did they lose 700,000 here? And most likely there'll be a simple condition from Russia that they don't want to see anybody from current military political leadership on these negotiations and or in power after. So the question is who? Very simple question. Who will negotiate? You mean nobody from current military political leadership? Right. So of the times of war, right? Okay, so Alexey, when you were part of this office, you were part of that leadership? No, I was not part of a leadership because I was an advisor. I was not staff advisor. I was not the person making decisions. I was affecting decisions, yes, but I was never making decisions for this government. So leadership is considered to be those who are making decisions, right? All right, so then when people bring General Zaluzhny as the possible leader for Ukraine, right, Nikolai, a very concerning figure for Russians because they have a significant fear of this figure, and he was the reason for their significant losses in this war. So shouldn't we use him, Alexei, as a threat then, or as a strong card? Well, right, we can, but do you think they will accept it? And what if Trump and his administration will exert additional pressure? How do you think they will, Alexei? Well, very simply, they can give us a list of names, Nikolai, and say, please do not run for the office. And if they go running, then, things may happen politically that will hinder them from becoming leaders of the country. This is what Ukrainians need to think about. When we internally talk about the configuration of elections and who can win over whom, did you ever stop to think that by joint decision of China, Russia, and Trump, who might meet, as some publications suggest, and basically sign a new Yalta Accord, one of them would be in regards of Ukraine, to not let anybody from existing military political leadership to lead the country, and we don't want to see them operating there in the highest level. What do we do then? Do you think Poroshenko will be one of these leaders? Absolutely. Poroshenko dumped Russian agreements twice, and then he also precluded Zelensky to fulfill his obligations effectively. So leaders of fractions probably will be in that list. Razumkov, what about this figure, Alexei, who was the leader of Rada, of our Congress? I'm just hypothetically suggesting. I'm curious to go through the list. Nikolai, hypothetically, all the leaders of all the bodies of power, executive, congressional, maybe only excluding judicial. Alexei, then what is then the sovereignty of Ukraine in this scenario? Nikolai, is there a sovereignty of Ukraine right now? Well, Trump's representative Kellogg said, Alexei, that Trump's government is trying to save the sovereignty of Ukraine, and he'll guarantee that it'll be honest and appropriate agreement. Well, Nikolai, I think some people are misreading the statement. When representative is talking about sovereignty of Ukraine that needs to be preserved, that means they're not talking about territory. They're not talking about many other things. They're talking about sovereignty. That's the last chip you can trade. That's basically a sentencing to the whole current political and military leadership of the country. Sovereignty implies to just leave some semblance of the country at the end. Our sovereignty in this world is lost. Two numbers. Our federal debt is 100% of our budget. International Monetary Fund holds these strings to that purse, so this is not sovereignty. Second, Ukrainian assets have been purchased by foreign companies to a large degree. That's two. And three, 80% of military and 80% of our budget do not belong to us. We're not a sovereign country for up to 85%, so we should not be surprised that certain political decisions will be enforced upon us. understand that administration that is saying that we can use military force against some allies in NATO will probably not be too shy about Ukraine, whom they think as a client sitting on their money. This is what we need to understand. We, again, as in chess, we fail to judge the situation on the board properly. People do not understand. They sometimes think that Ukraine is a pawn or some super queen. Reality is somewhere in the middle. We're probably a somewhat maimed horse that walks only one way on this chessboard. And in the near future, there will be a big redivision of the world. There will be a meeting between Putin and Trump and China. And they'll not be caring much about Ukraine in this meeting. They'll be caring about their interests. And who runs in Ukraine, who is in power in Ukraine, is way downstream from that. So, while we can be proud of our achievements and our army, we still need to prepare for reality of the world to come. And I see our compatriots concerning so much about my suggestion to strike certain truce with Russia. I am smiling, saying, guys, you need to live to the point, to survive to the point where we can sign the truce, because alternative to that is what's happening now. It's war. And Russia is moving slowly, but they are acquiring our territory. If they will continue moving in that fashion, they will eventually grab even more of our territory. Today, Pokrovsk mine was blown up, according to local media. Minus 30% to our budget, minus 50% to Ukrainian metallurgy production in one-day event. They don't even need to acquire Dnepr and Zaporozhye. They already affected our budget for 30%. So when you think Arestovych is suggesting to strike truce with Russia, you think I am a traitor? You think you have a ton of alternatives that you can pick from, EU and NATO and more? Guys, in order to trade with Russia for neutrality and even to start these negotiations with Russia, you need to really do your best around the events happening in Ukraine and around Ukraine. When American government is talking about preserving sovereignty for Ukraine, this is a horrible situation. That means there is nothing to fight above the level of sovereignty. And then again, this is not real sovereignty due to the reasons that I mentioned. Assets, debts, and our politics and who runs it. By our self-governance, we got us to such a horrible condition of relations with the West and with the United States, not even just with the United States, but with the Democratic Party of the United States, which have just lost their elections and don't have majority in their Congress and Senate. And people who got to power in states, they want to change the world order to a significant degree. And all our politics are based in Ukraine on the order that they are going to dismantle. And they also, to speak diplomatically, they have big concerns about Ukraine and its place in the world, because they consider Ukraine to be a sort of democratic Lego, a Lego for Democrat Party that they were toying with for a couple of decades. So situation is much worse than it seems. And the posts in Ukraine, they basically range from we're doomed to the post, oh yeah, to heck with Trump, we'll survive the next 4 years and we'll talk after. Well, okay, guys, let's see how much strength we have. We can probably survive till autumn, generally okay. What after? After that, it'll be horrible. I can open you another secret. Remember when Scholz refused to deliver certain air defense systems to Ukraine? Arestovych of the level of Patriot, who could have closed our skies. We understand that on the 23rd of February, there are elections coming. He doesn't want to make these decisions right before the elections, and he's leaving it to the next government. But there is a nuance coming from the very, very far west, that near Trump's team, people are discussing that aid to Ukraine will be diminished down to 25% from the current 100%. What then? You mean in the United States aid or at all? Well, mostly that was in regards to United States help. They might put some on Europe to provide, but Europe will not be able to provide too much. We were not getting enough as is, but we'll be getting 4 times less. What then? People don't understand the context of current situation, and they continue negotiations from it will continue the way it was before. Nothing of the kind. And in the near future, after the 20th of January, we'll have to witness that rather rapidly. Trump is preparing about 100 different decrees, different acts about internal and external politics, and I think some of them will touch upon Ukraine, and they likely will surprise us. In some cases, maybe nicely surprised, in others, very uncomfortably surprise us. Because Trump is also talking about allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles, long-range weapons, because he needs to exert pressure on Russia as well. But the tactic of dual ultimatum is an ultimatum at its core. We will be presented with an ultimatum that is rather rough. So when we're talking about double ultimatum, some of us are saying, well, good, we'll be able to strike Moscow, but they're forgetting to discuss that ultimatum is an ultimatum for us too. And, you know, they're actually considering Ukraine drafting 18-year-olds. And the reason is twofold. We just need to fill the trenches with infantry physically, because we don't have enough. Russians were in this position at the autumn of 22 after Kharkov operation. They conducted mobilization. They sent 150,000 to train and another 150,000 to block the front, and they blocked us. We froze in our advancements. So now America and allies are requesting the same thing from us. There is also another element. How many people were for immediate negotiations in Ukraine? Oh yeah, we do have these stats, Alexey. 73%, I think, right? A very familiar number, right? When we talked about the percent supporting and not supporting Zelensky. Continuation of war. Yeah, here's that slide. So 73.36. This was conducted by legal initiatives, and there were some concerns about this organization and its funding and its existence. They also ran a polling about presidents. You actually exist there with a smaller number of votes at about 0.96%. Budanov and Beletsky is at 1.3%. Tymoshenko has significantly impressive number of 12%. So there are some concerns about the truths of this polling agency. Well, you can see that there are people who are very active and people who are eager to help, and Yulia was pretty active recently. All right, imagine we have about half the country for peace, because other polling show about 50 to 60%, right? And this is polling coming from EU and United States. They regularly conduct the polling among our citizens there and here, and you can read some of this data. So according to them, it's not 73% for peace, it's closer to 60. But now, look, if we start drafting 18-year-olds, if they are now captured in the street and thrown to the front, in 2 weeks, how many people will want to strike peace with Russia? Significantly larger, right? Exactly, because when mothers and grandmothers will understand that their dear kids will be brought to fruitless storms of groves and Russian FPVs, they'll very quickly root for peace. So do you think not enough infantry on the front, is it the only reason why US are demanding Ukraine to expand the draft to 18-year-olds? It's both. This is what planning on option A, B, and C look like. They understand that drafting 18-year-old will, first of all, close the need of us, of our troops on the front, but will also bend us significantly toward peace agreements. Because Ukrainian mothers and grandmothers will dismantle any kind of government when their young ones will get to the trenches. And in these questions, one needs to understand what it implies when 60% of Ukrainians are for peace agreement. Half of them, or probably a significant part of them, see that as they need to come to Putin's office, kick his door down, and tell him to withdraw the troops. You think some people think so, Alexey? Oh, I know some people who think so. That there's about 30% of this group think that the negotiations have to be done in this fashion. Damn, you're surprising me there, okay. But Ukrainians are my favorite compatriots, Nikolai. They live in a very distorted, contextually, reality. They do not understand what is happening around the country, what is the price of this question, what we can do, what we cannot do. In reality, despite of all attempts to create a different context that is very different, this other context, the other data, gives us ability to play significant counter game. We have a lot of trump cards in our hands, but we refuse to see this context, and we don't see how to play that. We think that everything as is, as it was, and we'll be able to resist for another half a year. Guys, they'll shut down aid 4 times and nobody will continue resisting. And the fact that they'll also entangle Putin and create certain threats for him in regards to transfer of significant arms to Ukraine, this is his part of ultimatum. You will not be too happy, or you won't have time to look there. You need to think about the part of ultimatum that is pertaining to you. So our holy duty here, Nikolai, is to continue presenting reality as is, to dispel the counter-reality and all the pseudo-reality that's being created by propaganda. We need to give an opportunity to our listeners to be able to estimate the real situation. Because pseudo-reality is created by a lot of efforts, by a lot of different players, not only in Ukraine. Many of them are outside of Ukraine. Reality is different from that. And all these pollings that we were discussing here, they are showing that on one hand, the truth is spilling in on the level of gut feelings for people when they see that something is wrong. And the other hand, when they try to interpret them mentally, they do not read it right. Some of them understand negotiations with Putin as you stinky dog, get out of the territory of Ukraine, which is not reality in any option, in any scenario. You understand that, right? All right, that's an interesting spiel, Alexey. Thank you for sharing that. It's important for us to understand the details. Okay, end of this hour. Thank you guys if you enjoyed. Do not forget to click like and subscribe. I really appreciate that. It's the word of mouth that helps our channel to grow and allows us to continue translating these materials, presenting somewhat different point of view on the events happening in Ukraine, arguably having a bit more logic and strategic thinking behind it than the current leadership of the country does. And if you really like what we do, you can click that super thanks button. Thank you. Privateer out.